Bessie Smith was born in 1894. She would go on to be arguably one of the greatest voices in the blues music and was even known as the Empress of Blues. Smith would later die, as reported, on September 26, 1937, in a hospital in Clarksdale, Mississippi, because of the results of a car accident. So what really happened that night, and could Bessie have been saved? And how exactly did she die? John Hammond, record producer, created this myth that she was driven to white-only hospital where no one wanted to help her, and because of their refusal she died, and that otherwise she could have been saved. Decades later, he admitted that this was all made up. The myth was immortalized with Edward Albee wrote a one-act play titled The Death of Bessie Smith. This piece was immediately controversial in the era when civil rights movement was gaining support to repeal Jim Crow laws in the southern states. Hammond and Albee motives were undoubtedly affected by the politics of the day, but in light of actual evidence that has emerged, their claim that Bessie was turned away on account of her color seemed extremely unlikely. As we look back over 80 years later, we can see that Bessie's death was a tragedy and a huge loss to African American culture, but it had very little to do with racism. So what actually happened? Musical tastes began to change in the 30s, and the kind of blues that Bessie Smith sang began to wane in popularity. Swing and jazz music were now popular, and the blues had fallen out of favor. Smith was finding more and more difficult to make ends, and she developed a huge drinking problem, yet her singing was exceptional, according to the people of the time. In 2 in the morning in 1937, Smith and her partner and manager, Richard Morgan, were driving north on Highway 61. Morgan failed to see a truck parked on a side on the road with the lights off. There was a collision. Smith's right arm was nearly severed, and she had serious internal injuries. So who first came upon the scene but the doctors? Dr. Hugh Smith and his friend surgeon Henry Broughton were going on a fishing trip. Both of these men, must be noted, were white. The Mississippi Delta in the 30s was of course seeded with racism and white on black violence, so Dr. Smith and Dr. Broughton might have just chosen to ignore these unfortunate African American victims. They did not, of course. They stopped and were trying to do their best to give Smith emergency first aid. Morgan was just shaken up. Because she weighed more than 200 pounds, they had trouble loading her into the back seat of Dr. Smith's car. As they were doing so, a car bearing 2 drunken white couple crashed into Morgan's car, which then hit Dr. Smith's car. It took nearly 30 minutes for an ambulance to arrive. In fact, 2 arrived, one for injured European American woman in the second car and one for Smith. Jim Crow laws and mores had to be followed even in a critical condition and situation like this. Different ambulances rode off to different hospitals in nearby Clarksdale. G.T. Thomas Hospital surely did not have the same equipment and well-trained physicians and nurses as its counterpart, but Smith had to go there. Dr. Smith, interviewed by the police and later by the reporters, was clear that she had been taken to G.T. Thomas. That was actually a hospital for colored only, and the other hospital for white people that was mentioned in the Albee play and by John Hammond was actually only 1 mile, actually less than 1 mile away. She received their blood transfusion and her arm was amputated. Despite these efforts, she died of massive internal injuries. Bessie was only 43 years old. I've admired Bessie Smith since I first heard her voice, saw her photo, and read about her life. She was a strong and talented black woman who bowed to no one, and who lived her life the way she wanted. She wasn't really bound by social conventions, and she left a tremendous legacy of musical expression that touches the core of black American femaleness. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe, follow me on my Instagram account, and support our channel by becoming a patron on Patreon, and with a bunch of rewards help us creating together a great content with your favorite artists. Bye!